All right, I got to get a few things out of the way before we can even start this review. So, first off, I'm only going to be spoiling things from the second season of The Last of Us TV show. So, if you haven't played the game and you're worried about getting any future seasons ruined for you, don't worry about that. I'm not going to go into anything that happens in the future. I might reference a few names and locations later at the end of the video, but I don't think any of those names on their own is much of a spoiler, so you'll be fine. But here's the big disclaimer that I had to get out of the way because The Last of Us fandom, I love you. It includes me. I'm part of the fandom, but it's proven to be a fairly toxic place at times, right? And so I want to start off by saying and assuring everyone this is only my opinion. All right, I'm coming at this review from a genuine perspective. I'm not trying to rage bait or cash in on any of the hate trains that's going on that happened with the second game or is going on with Bella Ramsey right now. I'm not one of those weirdos who hates Bella Ramsey or thinks The Last of Us is woke or any nonsense like that. It's not the case here. Like I said, I genuinely am coming at this from a perspective of just offering my own opinion. And so The Last of Us Part 2 is actually maybe my favorite video game of all time, right? Everything from the gameplay to the actual story itself, in my opinion, is a masterpiece. I would seriously say the story of the second game is possibly my favorite story of any game, book, movie, TV show, whatever. That's how much I love the second game and the story of The Last of Us Part 2. And so with that said, I never planned on holding the TV show to the same standard as The Last of Us Part 2 video game because that's just an unreasonable thing to hold them to, right? And I knew this was going to be a different experience, and I'm a firm believer in not setting yourself up for disappointment when it comes to art, right? Like I say, always, no matter what, no matter how hyped you are for something, or whatever it is that you are expecting personally from a story or a piece of art, it's very important to step outside of yourself and engage with the story on its own terms rather than projecting your own expectations all over it. People, I see it all the time, get themselves so excited for whatever version of the show that they thought they would be getting. And oftentimes, people have this knee-jerk reaction that any change to the story or subversion of their expectations is automatically a bad thing. And I think we saw that with the original game, right? Part 2. People were pissed that it wasn't a Joel and Ellie story again. But if you were able to get over that feeling and accept and engage with the story that The Last of Us Part 2 is telling, you probably had a great time. So all of this tying it back to the show, I was looking forward to any of the changes that were going to come with the TV show. I was on board. I was ready to see how were they going to make the second game fit into a season of TV. And unfortunately, I don't think they did a very good job. And so in this video, I want to go over some of my complaints for how the second season was structured. And then at the end of the video, I'm going to share my idea for how they could have maybe fixed some of this by telling the story in a different way. So stay tuned to the end of the video so you can hear my pitch on where the show was maybe doomed to begin with, but we'll get there. First, focusing on my review for this season, I want to give one final disclaimer very quickly before I get into my complaints. I thought the show did a lot of things right. Okay, there's a lot of good things in the show. There are great moments scattered throughout this season, some amazing performances and heart-wrenching scenes that fit right in with this world of The Last of Us. We had some great action with the infected this season, and almost all of the big moments from the game, the important moments here, I thought were adapted and done extremely well, outside of maybe one that we can talk about later. But overall, as a standalone season of a TV show, this was a very, very fine product. It's not the worst thing in the world of anyone screaming and complaining. Like, it's not that bad. In fact, I would say second season of The Last of Us was more good than bad. But the problem, in my opinion, is that it's a far inferior version of the story that we already saw done in the game. And that's disappointing because I don't think it had to be this way. Now, I'm going to talk about the negatives, but again, there are good things in the show. If you personally loved it, that's awesome. I'm happy for you. The only reason I'm skipping straight to my complaints and glossing over many of the positives is because I don't want this video to be 5 hours long. So we got to get into it. My single biggest complaint, where I think all of the issues with this season point back to, is the characterization of Ellie and the fact that the showrunners, in my opinion, were absolutely terrified of losing the audience. And so let me explain what I mean by that. The Last of Us Part 2 is a story that shocks you into feeling this extreme hatred for Abby, right? And then it will slowly challenge you to see how far you would be willing to go for revenge. The entire point of the story is pretty straightforward. It's not that complex. There are many nuances to it that got completely missed or misinterpreted by the gaming audience when this first released. And so as a result, I think you can feel how afraid the show was of having anyone miss the point of this season and repeating some of the backlash that they got in the second game. And you can tell because the show just repeatedly beats you over the head with the moral of the story over and over again, spelling things out to the audience. And to me, it felt like they were so timid and cautious and making sure that the audience didn't blindly hate Abby, and they bent over backwards to make sure that you understood that Abby was not the villain, and in the process, they kind of ruined Ellie's character arc. Like, there are multiple scenes in episode 3, right after Joel's death, where characters, including Ellie herself, are spelling out to the audience that revenge is a hopeless and useless thing to chase after, and that, well, Joel did so many bad things in his life that he probably deserved what was coming to him to some degree. And it's like, yeah, okay, those are the themes of the story, I get it, but this all kind of falls flat if everyone already understands this before they even set out to find Abby. Like, the game forces you into this journey with Ellie. And because of how shocking and sudden Joel's death is, you are fully on board with getting revenge until, eventually, gradually, things start to go too far and you feel the walls closing in on them in Seattle, and you think, all right, now I'm a little bit more conflicted. As each day in Seattle goes by, you get further and further down this path, and it starts to make you question, is any of this really worth it? The show, on the other hand, gives you a million cautions and disclaimers up front that Ellie's path for revenge is going to be meaningless and that you should already be against it. And that directly undermines the point of Ellie's journey, right? You're supposed to hate Abby at the start of the game. You're supposed to hate her. And then slowly you have those feelings challenged and maybe even changed as the story unfolds. But the show never challenges you in that way because we already know all of Abby's motivations and you can sympathize with her before she even kills Joel. And as a brief side note, I saw hate comments for The Last of Us 2 over the years where people would argue, oh, the game, it would have been so much better if we liked Abby before we saw her kill Joel, because then this and this, whatever. And it's like, I just have to say, I think this season of TV proves how much of a massive mistake that would have been for the game. The story fundamentally does not work if you already have sympathy for Abby. The blind hate and rage that Ellie is supposed to feel for Abby is just not on display in this season, and it's in large part because the show bends over backwards to make sure that that's not the case. I remember before this season came out, really when the show first came out way back in 2023, I have friends and family who never played the game, and so they don't know any of the story, and I remember I could not wait, literally could not wait to see how the TV audience would react to Abby in season 2 when she kills Joel, because I was assuming that Abby, as a result of this, would go down as like an all-time great TV villain. Everyone would hate her. Everyone wants to see Ellie get her revenge because Abby in the game comes completely out of nowhere. She just comes out of nowhere, and I'm assuming she's going to, put that golf club to Pedro Pascal's head with no explanation, and people are going to hate her. I fully expected to see just outrage online of how everyone's like, let's go Ellie, let's go hunt down Abby, let's get her. Instead, because the show, again, has Abby spell everything out straight to the audience, and you get all of her motivations and justifications right up front, no one hated Abby. Like, every person that I talked to who didn't know where the story was heading into this, right? They didn't play the game, and they see Abby kill Joel, and I was talking to them, and they're just like, oh yeah, sucks that Joel died, but guess he had it coming to him. And, Abby, yeah, she was a little mean, but, Joel killed her dad, so I guess it all makes sense. And again, it's like, okay, yeah, that's the point of the game. That's you're arriving at the right conclusion, but you're not supposed to be there yet. You're not supposed to know all of this. You're not supposed to have the conclusion before the story starts. The story is supposed to build this hatred for Abby and her group and take it to that boiling point before suddenly snapping you back to Abby's perspective midway through the game, challenging you to spend time with this person who you've spent however many hours wanting to kill, right? Like, that's the whole point. And so the second game, to me, it's fantastically paced. There's so many great parallels between Abby and Ellie, and everything from the writing to the voice acting performances are just dialed in to create this incredible, tense environment where never for a second do you question what Ellie is doing in Seattle or why she's there in the first place, right? But in the show, I didn't get any of that urgency or direction. It felt more like a school field trip rather than a bloodthirsty hunt for revenge. And I swear it felt like Ellie, of all people, it seemed like she was the last person who wanted to be in Seattle at times, tracking down Abby. Every other character is taking the initiative and planning things and strategizing, like Dina and Jesse throughout this entire season. It feels like they're babying Ellie and treating her like a 5-year-old who can't be trusted by herself in public. Like, they have to explain to Ellie multiple times simple strategies and simple battle tactics. Like, you can't just go run straight into a military base and start shooting, man. It's like, I get that maybe this was the show's attempt at, telling us that Ellie, she's so eager for revenge that she isn't thinking everything through. But there's a fine balance between being blinded by revenge and just being a complete dummy, right? Ellie in the game, she is lasered in on finding Abby. Like, she is as locked in as an individual can possibly be. And sure, Ellie makes some mistakes throughout the second game, because ultimately Ellie and her group, they are way above their heads entering Seattle. I don't think anyone expected to be in the middle of an ongoing war to this magnitude. It is way out of their control. They did not expect it to be that difficult. But Ellie in the game, despite all that, despite being way above her head, she's still incredibly smart and crafty in navigating this world and trying to find Abby. And I just didn't get that from the show. Again, I don't think this is Bella Ramsey's fault. I blame it more on the writing, because Ellie just comes across so immature and buffoonish at times throughout this season. There's that scene in the finale where Jesse has to pull her back from helping a random Seraphite kid. That was maddening to watch. Like, genuinely made me upset, because there is nothing, and I mean literally nothing, that is supposed to stop Ellie from finding Abby in Seattle, especially not the life of some random Seraphite who she has no context for. I understand the moral dilemma that we see on screen. I think that's fine enough. It's interesting, but it's so far away from the type of character that Ellie is supposed to be at that point in the story. If it was Jesse who wanted to save the Seraphite kid and Ellie was like, no, what are you doing? Like, this could potentially ruin our chances of finding Abby or whatever, that would make sense. But Ellie is not risking everything to save this one random person's life. She's not Spider-Man or some, pure-hearted hero that's trying to save everyone. That is not her character. She is supposed to be dead set on finding Abby at the cost of anything. And the show proves this like 3 minutes later, because shortly after this, Ellie abandons Jesse and Tommy to go find Abby. And so, like, what are we saying here? Saving Tommy or helping Jesse, that's not worth it. Ellie doesn't want to do that. But jumping in front of 6, WLF soldiers to save a random person, that's where Ellie feels compelled to make a move. It doesn't make any sense. And I'm not judging the whole season off of that one scene, but it was so bad and I had to rant about that in particular. And if you want to say that, it's a different interpretation of this character, then sure, I understand that. I respect it if you enjoy it. I didn't, and this is just my opinion, but another scene that I think highlights what I'm saying here with my issue and how Ellie was characterized, it's the difference between Ellie's determination in the game versus her general carelessness in the show. And we see it again when Dina reveals that she's pregnant. So in the show, we get kind of a lovey-dovey, heartfelt moment where Ellie is kind of cracking jokes and the tone is generally a lot warmer. But in the game, Ellie ain't telling no jokes. Dina makes a joke to break the tension a little bit, which is fine. That's good for her character. But notice what I said right there. Tension. The word tension. It's like the show forgot that this was supposed to be a story full of, darkness and dread and tension. The show forgot why we're here in Seattle in the first place, because in the game, when Ellie finds out Dina's pregnant, her initial reaction is, oh my God, this is going to be an obstacle for me to navigate when it comes to me finding Abby and getting revenge. Like, there's this selfishness on display. Dina and her baby are now a detriment to the primary goal of killing Abby. And I just felt like the show consistently forgot that primary objective that should have been at the forefront of every single decision that gets made throughout the season. It wasn't. And the way that it's shown in that scene is just another example of Ellie's characterization being a problem. And again, I want to say I don't think it's fair to blame this all on Bella Ramsey. Don't be a weirdo, right? Like, don't swarm them with hate for, there's so many freaks online that have been doing that, and it's completely out of pocket and missing the larger issue, which is the writing, and the way that she is presented in the show was a huge mistake in my opinion. And so I made this stupid little chart to show you some of the key characteristics of video game Ellie and show Ellie. And I think this explains why so many people found the show version of Ellie to be generally unlikable. She comes across as immature and incompetent in the show. Her demeanor is way too carefree for the situation that she's supposed to be in. All of the jokes she makes in the season feel like a tonal shock to the damaged character that she's supposed to be. Because in the game, Ellie comes across as hurt and angry. She's traumatized. She's shut off from everyone else. And yes, she's on this self-destructive path, but there's still this intense determination that's holding her together and keeping her on course. Ellie is such a badass in the game, and I just didn't get any of that from Ellie in the show. She felt clumsy, she felt out of her depth in this season. I never found her threatening or really even capable, which is just a massive disservice to the character of Ellie. And so again, I cannot repeat this enough. It's only my opinion. I respect anyone who loved this version of Ellie. That's your opinion. Didn't work for me, and that's my explanation for why. Now I want to pull away and look at this from a big picture perspective and explain where I think the show maybe set themselves up for failure and where they could have fixed this by structuring the story in a different way. Because ultimately, I think doing this in a 7-episode season and choosing to stay true to the formula of the game was a fatal mistake. I don't think there was an obvious or easy way to adapt the second game, so I don't envy the issue that the writers had to solve here. It was such a huge story, and it's told in such a way that it was always going to be difficult to convey on TV, but there needed to be better planning here, okay? And I don't want to hear anyone tell the budget, they didn't have it. HBO Max has unlimited money, okay? They could have done whatever they wanted to. The Last of Us is one of the biggest shows they have. They could have found a way to make basically anything work, right? Look at the freedom that Stranger Things has over at Netflix, and there's no reason why The Last of Us couldn't have done the same thing. So with hindsight, and in an ideal world, you extend the season to 10 episodes, maybe even 12 minimum. Really take your time focusing on Ellie, Dina, Jesse, Tommy, as they're all in Seattle, right? Build out that world, their moment-to-moment survival in Seattle. Give the show enough time to breathe and develop some of that tension. Spend some actual time with these characters, getting to know them. Everything was so rushed in this season. But if you do it this way and you take your time and you have 12 episodes, you leave the audience feeling way more satisfied with that cliffhanger. And just as importantly to what I'm saying, you got to have season 3 ready to go. Not only does season 2 have to be like a solid 12 episodes, but season 3 needs to be ready to go in like a year, like as soon as possible. It's not going to come out in a year. I don't expect to see season 3 for like 2 or 3 years. But again, in an ideal world, they should have either filmed these back to back or had season 3 ready to film this summer with a release next year. Because the pacing right now is all sorts of fucked up. And because you blew it in season 2 and there's going to be a multi-year gap before we get the next season, you might just be fucked moving forward if season 3 isn't a huge upgrade from what we just got. Because right now, to me, it sounds like the general audience is kind of getting ready to tap out of this story. They're on the ropes, they're not really sure, and that wouldn't have happened if you properly set the foundation in season 2 with a longer season. But again, you messed up Ellie and her characterization so badly that now all we have is really to hope that Abby can pull people back in for season 3. But again, in an ideal world, you have that 12 episode season. You take your time building this first chapter of the story. But if that wasn't possible, that wasn't on the board, and they were, and let's be real, again, HBO Max could have found a way to do it if they wanted to. But let's say it wasn't possible to do a longer season and they couldn't have had the next season in the chamber ready to release. They couldn't have filmed them back to back or this quickly, whatever it may be. If that's the result, then they just needed to change how the narrative was told. They just needed to fundamentally change how the story was going to be told and cut their losses, because telling it this way was not satisfying at all. Rushing through Ellie's section and then having this huge gap before an Abby season was a big mistake. And as much as I love the way part 2 is told in the game with the split perspectives, the showrunners should have realized that we're doing a massive disservice to the original story by trying to adapt it this way. And if we can't do 12 episodes, then we need to change the structure. Because if 7 episodes is all we're getting, then they should have just done both perspectives at the same time and dragged this story into another season, right? So do Abby and Ellie side by side, spend a bunch of time with both character groups, each character getting their, developments and everything. Slowly go through the events of days 1 and 3 in Seattle, right? Really, really take your time there. And maybe, since we're only doing 7 episodes, let's end this season. They're still in Seattle. Maybe we end day 2 in Seattle. And sure, we don't get to day 3 or the theater sequence yet. But I actually think if you ended it on day 2 in Seattle and you had been spending time with both Ellie and Abby, that would have set up for a much more satisfying cliffhanger and a really awesome finale, right? Imagine that. We spent time with both characters. Now we're ending Ellie's part of the season where she gets Abby's location from Nora in the hospital. And then Abby, she just fought the freaking Rat King in the season finale. And now we know she's getting ready to go to the invasion on day 3 on the Seraphied Island. And so it's this like clashing of Ellie and Abby that would have set up for just a banger of a cliffhanger with some huge moments coming up in the next season. Everyone would have been locked in for that. That would have been so much better than the rushed version of Ellie's story that we got. Because again, if you're already going to spoon feed the narrative to us and give us all the moral dilemmas spelled out already, then doing the split perspectives is honestly a waste of time, right? Like, we already have all the sympathy for Abby, and so splitting days 1 and 3 into different perspectives, it's already lost its punch or its purpose. And so you might as well have showed both of their arcs side by side. You do season 2 getting through most of Seattle, you start season 3 wrapping up Seattle, move us to Santa Barbara by, hopefully the midpoint, and then you conclude the second game, in a clean 2 seasons rather than doing what looks like probably 4 seasons now. It's all a mess right now, and I don't feel happy with how Ellie's Seattle story was told. Maybe season 3 gets us back on track. I have faith in Caitlin as an actress. I've had stock in her for a while. I think her small parts in this season were amazing. I truly think that she can carry all of season 3 on her back if she needs to. But I'll always say, Ellie, she was done dirty in this portion of her story. They really did a disservice to the opening half of the game, and I can't help but feel disappointed because of that. But for the last time, that's just my opinion. Listen, this season was underwhelming, but I'd still give it a solid, maybe 6.5 out of 10. It's a fine viewing experience. I think I explained my issues with it, but it's still an overall solid season of TV. So let me know what you thought of The Last of Us Part 2. Leave me a comment and please hit the like button or subscribe. I really appreciate it if you made it this far into the video. I hope you stick around for more. And until then, I'll see you next time.